Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are so jam-packed here this week, heading into the monumental game on Saturday between Georgia and Alabama, trying to make good use of your time to help be a real preview opportunity for you to give you everything you need to get ready for this game on Saturday. Obviously, one of the big issues around the game is how does Georgia stop this Alabama rushing quarterback, tremendous athlete, Jalen Milroe, especially given the fact that UGA's had its issues with that thus far this season. We have a very special guest on today's show before we're done to help us with that. The former UGA great David Pollack going to be with us here around 10:50 this morning if you're watching live. David Pollack helping us break down that and also the overall feeling around Georgia here as it tries to go for 3-23 and stay on that mission to win a national championship. Really good stuff with David Pollack coming up on that here today. Connor Riley there as well. The feeling around this game, update on injuries, rumors are out there regarding all kinds of stuff, including the idea that a Georgia assistant could be on his way to a new job. So we're going to try to cover all of that. But beginning with this, Nick Saban, more praise for Georgia yesterday. And the direction of Saban's praise, I think, points us towards what matters for UGA in terms of trying to win this game. Let's talk about that right now as we get it started. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Big show for us here today. Before we're done, the former UGA great David Pollack going to be on our show. Looking forward to that. It was this time a year ago that Pollack said that Georgia pretty much conquered college football, and he said that sitting right next to Nick Saban. Does he still feel that way? Is that still the vibe around this game on Saturday between Georgia and Alabama? And for David, who on our show before sort of expressed some concern about all the things that Georgia's had to replace over the course of the last couple of years defensively, given the personnel that Georgia has in place right now, how well set up is it to go out and handle this Alabama offense there on Saturday? We will cover all of that with David Pollack coming up in just a couple of minutes. I want to begin with this, though. I think it's been interesting this week to hear Nick Saban talk about Georgia, because when you listen to Saban discuss the Dogs, I think you get a little bit of a direction in terms of how Georgia needs to go about trying to win this game on Saturday. And it's a sharp contrast to what Kirby Smart also talked about yesterday, too. Both coaches had a media availability. I got a chance to listen to both. And, later on this week, not today, but later on this week, we're going to get into what Kirby Smart mostly talked about with his own press conference yesterday. I would say that the overwhelming majority of the questions to Kirby Smart yesterday were about stopping Jalen Milroe. And how do you do that? How do you contain him? Georgia's had its issues with running quarterbacks. Milroe is the best running quarterback that Georgia's faced thus far this season. So what do you do about that? That's one of the things we'll talk to David Pollack about a little bit later on. Kirby Smart talked about that a lot yesterday. And I want to kind of spend more time on that than we have able to do here today. So we'll push that aside. But I also want to reiterate a point that we also made on yesterday's show too, which is there is a certain extent to which Alabama is just going to have some offensive success. You would certainly believe that's probably the case. And so therefore the responsibility then is for Georgia to have even more offensive success than that, to kind of really redefine the identity here and remind folks, perhaps a better way of saying that, of what the identity of this Georgia team is here this year. We believe the most explosive and the overall best offense of this kind of national championship era. That's what we believe this current Georgia offense is. Better than what it was, with all due respect to the great Stetson Bennett, better than what it was in 2021 or 2022. There's just overall more offensive firepower, and Nick Saban certainly seems to see that there as well. Saban is operating on the assumption that even though Brock Bowers did not play this past Saturday against Georgia Tech, that Bowers is likely to be healthy and playing against Alabama on Saturday. We believe that's probably, a legitimate belief and probably a well-founded idea on the part of Nick Saban. And when Saban spoke yesterday to the reporters, he had some very, very complimentary things to say about Brock Bowers, while also having some pretty interesting words of praise for the Georgia offense overall. Let me let you hear what Nick Saban had to say about that. This is from yesterday.
Georgia's got a really, really good offensive team, and the quarterback obviously does a fantastic job of, whether they're running the ball, carrying out fakes, play action passes, drop back passes. I mean, he is very efficient and effective in everything that he does. He's very accurate with the ball. He's smart, throws at the right place. So he does a great job of implementation of exactly what they want to do. And they have a really, really good scheme. And obviously, Brock Bowers is a really, really good player, probably the best player at his position in the country. And, I'm assuming that he will play in the game. I don't know any different than that. And he's a mismatch issue, but he's also a good blocker and a really good competitor. So it's not only his pass catching ability, it's his ability to do all the things that really good football players do, and he does them at a high level.
When I hear Nick Saban saying what he's saying there, to me, it sort of speaks to the evolution of what Georgia has been this year. I remember back during the Auburn game, for instance. Georgia also had its issues at Jordan-Hare Stadium this year. You know that. I remember at the Auburn game this year kind of saying, when you looked at the way that Georgia had to kind of feed Brock over and over and over again at the end of that game to preserve its chance at victory, we came on the air after that the following week sort of saying that Brock Bowers has the look, the appearance right now of being more individually important than any player thus far in this national championship era. That Georgia's sort of always been an ensemble cast, and it could be a different guy on a different day, offensively, defensively, that there were a lot of really good players all working together, and that's been kind of the hallmark of what Georgia has been. But in 2023, especially in the early part of that season, Georgia somewhat struggled offensively against South Carolina. Had some offensive struggles as well there at Auburn. That was a day in which quarterback Carson Beck probably grew up a lot. But when Georgia was kind of feeling its way around offensively, we were left to believe that Bowers had an outsized level of importance compared to any other individual player that Georgia had thus far during this run. And now when you sit here in late November, about to turn into December for the first Saturday in the month in the SEC Championship, you don't really feel that way as much anymore. Brock Bowers is no less successful a player than he ever was. Nick Saban there calls him the best player at his position in the country. We would also say that Bowers is so good it kind of defies describing him by just one position. He's more than just a good tight end, although he's a great one. This is a guy who's been mentioned as a candidate for the Blitnikoff Award. He's not going to win it, but the award that goes to the best wide receiver in the country, we believe that Bowers is a worthy consideration when it comes to that there too. That if you look at the overall statistical profile of what he's done during his career, it actually compares pretty favorably to Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, this particular year, Bowers has missed some time, so the overall numbers for Harrison this year are better, but for a career, Bowers has been just as valuable for UGA as Harrison's been for Ohio State. We've said that over and over and over. And yet what we've also learned is that while Bowers remains just as valuable to UGA as he always was, the overall value around him has shot way up. That Georgia is just a much better offensive team. In fact, I find myself actually saying something going into this game on Saturday that I don't know that I thought I would be saying if you want to go back a couple of months ago when we were talking about so much of the success of this team kind of pending on whatever Brock Bowers does. That I now think that Brock is probably not the most important offensive player for Georgia in this game. I believe that importance has probably shifted more over to Carson Beck. And then what Carson's shown the ability to do is when there was no Brock Bowers for the Florida game, then you're feeding Ladd McConkey over and over, and McConkey's having great success. And then when Bowers comes back, all of a sudden he's having great success. Now when you've got no Bowers, no McConkey, for like say the Tech game on Saturday, it's Dylan Bell who's having great success. That Carson Beck at quarterback this year has just been really good at spreading the ball around and getting multiple guys involved. And it seems like it's a different guy every game, but it's also a multitude of guys in every game there as well. And this Georgia offense just kind of shows the ability of whatever the opponent's going to score. And we've kind of gotten used to this year, the idea that more points are being scored against Georgia we're sort of used to. But whatever the opponent seems able to score, Georgia offensively seems to be able to score more than that. And that's going to be really, really important on Saturday. You want to go back a year ago at this time. Georgia really showed how great it was by how many points it scored during the postseason. It got an easy win in the SEC championship because it hung 50 on LSU. It needed every single one of the 40-something points it scored to win the Peach Bowl game against Ohio State. A little bit of a vanity expression in the national championship by hanging 65 on TCU, but once again, it was the explosive nature of that offense that sort of rendered that game a non-competitive affair from the very beginning. Georgia was at its best offensively last year in the postseason. That's to the credit of Stetson Bennett, who was always a big game player, and to the credit of Todd Monken, who designed some diabolical game plans. Well, now Georgia begins its postseason run for 2023, and as good as this offense has been thus far during the regular season, the challenge is going to be every bit as good as last year's team was offensively as you move towards the postseason. And it's probably more important now than it's ever been before, because now you're facing the kinds of offenses like Alabama on Saturday who are going to probably be able to score against you. And so therefore, you've got to find a way to score more yourself. Thus far this season, Georgia has always been equal to that task. We expect the same thing to be true on Saturday as well. Now, let me shift gears to something else here really quickly. College football is kind of a funny thing. And those of us who love college football and sort of obsess over college football, we know how true this is. We're not always the most normal people, and the people that probably run college football are oftentimes not the most normal types either, I don't guess. One of the most abnormal things we do, one of the strangest things we do is we take so many important parts of the college football calendar and we sort of cram it all into one spot at one particular time, and we're about to go through that. So you have got a lot going on with Georgia getting ready to play Alabama on Saturday, and that's a pretty full meal to eat right there in itself. But you're also moving into a heavy rumor season, like right on the other side of the SEC championship. It's going to be transfer portal rumors galore, both guys who may be coming to Georgia and guys who may be leaving Georgia. There's going to be some of that going on. We just know that's the case. You've also got early signing period coming up here there as well. That's been true now for the last few years. And in addition to that, you've also got crazy coaching rumors going on there as well. And one of the rumors that feels a little bit more substantial than perhaps some of the others is the idea that Fran Brown, who from New Jersey, came to Georgia from Rutgers a couple of years ago, has been a wonderful defensive backs coach for UGA, specifically focusing on the cornerbacks, that Brown has now emerged as possibly a top candidate to replace Dino Babers as Syracuse coach. Let me give you this from Syracuse.com. Brent Axe is the guy's name here, saying that Syracuse is finalizing a deal to make Fran Brown its next head football coach, according to two sources with knowledge of the agreement. A formal announcement could come as soon as Tuesday. So this is just the reality. Sounds like they're on the sort of basis of what Brent Axe is reporting, this thing's about to be done, that Brown's actually graduating from being a candidate, and he's actually moving the direction of actually being the next Syracuse coach, which, when you're as successful as Georgia is, this is just some of the stuff that's going to go down. You're going to lose some assistant coaches. Sam Pittman left to go to Arkansas, become head coach. Dan Lanning left as defensive coordinator to become Oregon head coach. You're just going to lose guys, and Brown is sort of the next guy to lose. And that doesn't mean there aren't potential ramifications to this. Is this a slight distraction for Georgia on the field on Saturday? You'd like to think it's not, but, obviously, a guy moving on, taking another job is going to at least give him some other things to think about. That's just a reality. What does this mean for guys like Ellis Robinson, some other recruits? That's probably a question worth sort of wrestling with there as well. But this is just the way that it goes down. When you're the best program in college football, it takes great coaches to get you to that point, and great coaches who are working with you as assistants are going to have opportunities to go other places, and that seems like what Fran Brown perhaps has right now. So some of this is just a practical reality that must be confronted. But let me give you a silver lining on this just for a quick moment, and after that we'll shift gears to something else. When Fran Brown first came here a couple of years ago, most of us, even those of us who love the rumor mills and love the next hot coach and kind of get into all that kind of stuff, most of us do not know a ton about Fran Brown, just to be completely honest. And yet Kirby Smart, whose eye for talent from the coaching ranks is apparently as prodigious as his eye for talent when it comes to the player ranks, identified an up-and-coming assistant who was such a fast-rising star that within a couple of years he'd be a Power 5 head coach, and yet Smart sort of plucked him out of obscurity. That gives you an idea what the head man is here right now. The kind of guy that seems to be able to find the next big thing when it comes to an assistant coach and take that ambition and that upward mobility and that hunger to achieve and kind of channel that and get value out of that for the Georgia program. That is a very good thing. You've heard me say this before, and I'll repeat myself here again. That much the same way that player talent is a finite resource, there's never enough of it to go around, coaching talent is also a finite resource there as well. And sometimes there's the big name you can hire, and sometimes the big name hire doesn't quite work out. Florida thought it had a big name hire when it stole Corey Raymond away from LSU to coach defensive backs, but we found out yesterday Raymond's losing his job. So sometimes spending big on the big name hire doesn't quite work out. So you've got to have another plan in place. And for Kirby Smart, that plan oftentimes is having long tentacles that stretch all throughout plenty of places in college football, recognizing young guys who have the look of a coach that can really grow into something. That's what Kirby Smart seems to have done with Fran Brown. It looks like he may be called upon to now do that again, and obviously you expect Kirby Smart to do that. And you also expect Georgia to do like a lot of championship teams have been forced to do in the past. Weather the storm of potential distractions, assistant coaches leaving, going other places, all the things that are going on, but finding a way to stay focused on the field on Saturday. That's Georgia's challenge here right now, and our guess is they'll do a good job of managing all of that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video. We start 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation app. We're 10 a.m. after that across all video platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them. Just happy to have you with us here for the program. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, who are making it all possible. Foundation, waterproofing issues, you know those can be big time problems if you're a homeowner and you want to take the best possible care of your home. But that's really why Engineered Solutions of Georgia exists. They got the word solution right there in their name. What that means is they want to help you solve your foundation, your waterproofing problems. Now, the first step towards doing that is really educating you on how to spot the problem. Now, deep down, you probably know this, but what I want to do is kind of give you a little bit of a trigger in your mind of, oh yeah, when I see this, BA said this. So when you see like a wet spot showing up in your garage, or there's sort of like water residue in a crawl space, garage, basement area, something like that, that's the sign that things may not be properly sealed the way they're supposed to be. And that ought to be a clue to you to reach out to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Same thing when you see like those horizontal cracks in your sheetrock or those stair-step cracks in the brick on the outside of your house. Once again, a little bit of a sign that perhaps you need to reach out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Now, I love this recommendation for a few reasons. A, they're proud partners of UGA, and it's always fun to support those that support the Dogs. Also, when you talk about some of our longest time, most loyal friends, our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia have absolutely been that for us. So it would really be a personal favor to me that when you're facing some sort of foundation waterproofing issue, you'd reach out to Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because they've been so good to us over the years, and I know the same sort of care they've taken with our relationship, they'll take that with your relationship there too. They've also got an entire team of engineers on staff. That means there's nobody else in our marketplace that devotes that level of resource for solving your problem. That's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is all about. So give them a call. Number, super easy to remember. Simply dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, a solution for your foundation and your waterproofing issues. Proud partners of UGA, longtime friends of ours on DawgNation Daily here as well. So, as I told you off the top of the show, busy one for us. It's David Pollack coming up before we're done. It's Connor Riley coming up here in a couple of minutes there as well. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. And one of the things we've sort of talked about here this week is there's an element of which there's a truth that lies kind of below the surface about this game on Saturday that both sides are going to be somewhat unwilling to acknowledge. The idea that there's a lot of deep backstory here, and that while Georgia's always going to be motivated towards winning a championship, go for 3-23, I think there is some legitimacy to the belief that it's a little bit more sweet when you beat Alabama to do it. The comparison I made in the past is growing up, Mike Tyson wasn't always the champion in a given moment, but for a long time he was sort of thought to be the baddest man on the planet. And when you thought about it as a boxer, who's the most, prestigious victory you could get. Beating Tyson sort of felt that way. As he got older, that became less true, but it remained true for a long time. And I think there is a certain, extent to which the cachet has existed for Alabama. They're not the champs. They haven't been in 2 years. But they do have some of that sort of baddest team on the planet mystique still left over, even for a team like Georgia. If we're being honest, there is a prestige that comes from beating Alabama that did not exist when Georgia beat LSU a year ago. That's just real, and that's just true. No one wants to acknowledge that on the player side, the coach side, but there's clearly some extra juice in this game this year than existed a year ago when Georgia played LSU. And on the flip side of that, for Alabama, obviously, they have been forced to give Georgia a degree of respect that they didn't have to give Georgia back when these two teams played in 2021. At that time, Georgia was trying to prove it was the team that could beat Alabama, and Alabama was kind of living with the idea that we are bulletproof from this insurgency. We're bulletproof from this up-and-comer over there to our east. We are still Alabama, and they are still Georgia. And that meant something at the time. Well, it means something completely different now. And yet the next chapter of all of this is about to be written on Saturday. And there's an extent to which we all, media, me, fan, all of us, that we can sort of talk about this openly in a way that the coaches, players in this game perhaps might not. And when you look back through the annals of like SEC championship history, this sort of rhymes with some of the things you've perhaps seen in the past. For instance, think back to the 2008, 2009 seasons when Florida on its way to winning a national championship. I know for many of our audience, it's hard to actually remember, but there was a time when Florida was winning national championships. It's a long time ago. If you have young kids, they weren't alive to experience it. But there was a time in the distant past when Florida was actually a really good team and won championships. Almost a faint memory for many of us, but it did happen. And the point is that at that time, it's Florida beating Alabama to get there. But in the following year, the rematch was so substantial in the minds of Alabama, they were kind of stewing over the idea of being where Florida had been and kind of rising up in what was Nick Saban's, at that time, third year in the program there in Tuscaloosa. And Kirby Smart, who doesn't always love talking about the past, did talk about that a little bit yesterday, his remembrance of that 2009 SEC championship game. This is what Kirby said about that.
I remember the game. It was a game for us that we had lost the previous year and felt like we were really close to winning and felt like we were going to have to get over that hurdle. They were the dominant team in the country, I guess, at that time, and they had some really good football players and had a really good coaching staff. And we played a good game that game, and the players all played and believed in themselves, and it was a tremendous venue and game, sure.
So tremendous venue and game. I was lucky enough to be there. I remember that well. And the one thing that Smart does acknowledge, and he doesn't always acknowledge these kinds of things about the past. He doesn't always play along with the narrative, but he does acknowledge, the idea that at that particular time, Alabama, in the early days of Nick Saban as a coach, in the early days of Kirby Smart as a defensive coordinator, was trying to get to where Florida had been in the 2008 season. And it just so happens that yesterday on our show, a guy who played in both those games, Mike Johnson, was talking more about that there as well. And I don't normally play a clip that's as long as the one I'm about to play for you. It's over a minute long, but I want to play the whole thing for you because I think it kind of speaks to in greater detail what Smart doesn't want to go into full detail discussing right there, which is in the 2008-2009 back-to-back games between Alabama and Florida, the motivation was obvious. Kirby, who coached in the game, Mike Johnson on the Alabama side, who played in the game, they'll openly talk about that. But in this particular game on Saturday, that sort of level of motivation, or perhaps better said, the mental edge in the game, it's not quite obvious. Nick Saban has talked openly this week a few times about Georgia's 29-game winning streak. It seems, pretty realistic that Alabama wants to be the one to stop that streak. However, on the flip side of that, Georgia now has the confidence of knowing it not only can win 2 straight national championships, but it also can beat Alabama, something that it did in Indianapolis a couple of Januaries ago. But it's also hearing people say, well, you can't win this game in Atlanta. Nick Saban's never lost in this building. Saban's only lost one time in his career in the city of Atlanta, going back to the days of the Georgia Dome. So where does the mental edge in this particular game lie? Mike Johnson, Kirby Smart both might suggest that Alabama had it prior to the 2009 SEC championship. But how about for this game here this year? I thought that yesterday Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American, picking up on what Kirby Smart also talked about, had some interesting things to say about that. This is from our show yesterday. This is Mike Johnson.
Yeah, I've been in those locker rooms. We lost to Florida in 2008 when it was a 1-2 matchup in the SEC championship game. And we took that edge the entire season the next year and ended up beating Florida in 2009, the Tim Tebow cries game and all that. And we kind of had that chip on our shoulder, whereas I don't think Florida did. They ran into some issues later that year, had some guys get in trouble, had some guys make some bad decisions. The fact that we are a year removed from that national championship, SEC championship combination back in 2021, I don't know where the emotional edge goes to. I'll be honest. I think Alabama has played with their backs against the wall since the Texas game, and they've kind of played with that attitude of we have to come out swinging or else we're going to lose sight of our goals for the rest of the year. But Georgia is the best team in the country, and while everybody around the country keeps waiting on Georgia to get complacent and to fall off, you and I both know Kirby Smart. I love Kirby Smart. He's one of my favorite coaches of all time, and he has that youthful attitude that really gets those players fired up. And there's a 26-year age difference, 25-year age difference between him and Nick Saban. I think it shows in some of these emotional situations. And so Kirby really has the ability to fire that locker room up. I know Alabama has their backs against the wall and feels like they need to come out swinging against the number one team in the country. And so I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on as we move throughout this week, for sure.
I think sometimes we overrate the role that emotion plays in a game like this or motivation plays in a game like this. I do. And yet I also think in a game in which you're relatively evenly matched, Georgia-Alabama's not quite a 50-50 showdown, but it's close enough. Georgia's only a small favorite here, less than a touchdown against Alabama right now. In a game that's something close to 50-50, even 1% better can be enough for a landslide. And so I think both Georgia and Alabama are trying to lean on what is the way in which we can be like 1% more focused, 1% better for the game. I think for Nick Saban, he obviously leans on his experience. He's coached in a lot of these games before, and perhaps his players know that he may coach in this game for the last time. If not this year, then sometime pretty soon. They want glory for him one more time before he's done. That's the unspoken subtext to the Alabama side of this. But as Mike Johnson points out, Kirby a very different kind of coach in that he's decades younger, and that youth brings a hunger and an intensity. And Kirby Smart seems to be really good about knowing when to scream and yell and give you the I want to eat speech, but he also seems to be really good about when it's about something more focused and more disciplined than that. And calling upon whatever that is in his mind that kind of gives him the idea of the right energy to show before this game, I do think it matters. This is not a back-to-back rematch the way the 2008 and 2009 SEC championship was, but it is two teams that have a lot of history against each other. And I do think that history matters whether the players, the coaches pretend that way or not. This is the next chapter in this rivalry. Perhaps it's the final chapter. And there is a certain sense of finality, or at least a cementing of the narrative based on who wins on Saturday, and that is obviously one of the things that makes the game so fascinating. So that is Around the Doghouse. It's here on DawgNation Daily today, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Now, before I bring on Connor Riley, let me also quickly say this, that if you go to DawgNation.com, final moments to be a part of our Go for 3 and 23 tailgate. The all-inclusive experience right there at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Home Depot backyard, closest tailgate to the stadium. Wonderful experience, great food, great beverage, and, excuse me, a Go for 3 in 23 t-shirt for the first 100 people to sign up, which we're kind of bumping up against our limit on. So go to DawgNation.com, find out more about that, and you can be a part of our Go for 3 and 23 tailgate. Final opportunity for you to be there and have a wonderful experience, but DawgNation.com is going to give you more details on that. All right, it's David Pollack today before we're done. Also a little bit of a preview of the College Football Playoff Top 25 to be released tonight, the big questions facing that group, and the final Top 25 prior to the official announcement on Sunday. We'll get to that before we're done today there as well. But for now, rumors about Georgia coaches, injury stuff, everything ahead of the game against Alabama on Saturday. Let's do all of that with Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Connor Riley here in Athens yesterday, talking to some Georgia players, talking to Georgia coach Kirby Smart, and Connor, let me bring you in on this. I think that there may be plenty of times when fans sort of wonder, what is the job of the media? Why are there so many media people around here? Well, I think this is one of those weeks when I do believe the media perhaps has a little bit more of an important job because perhaps with good reason, the Georgia side, the Alabama side, they're not going to talk about the real significance of this game. They're going to do everything they can to pretend it is a game just like any other. They're probably wise to do so, I guess. But the actual truth is far different from that. And so this is one of those things where I think we do sort of have to acknowledge that this is deeper than just trying to advance the college football playoff. This is deeper than just trying to win another national championship for two programs that both have multiple. This is deeper than all of that. There's a richer backstory here. And I think that's interesting about how true that is, while at the same time, how far out of the way, guys like Cedric Von Braun and Kamari Lassiter, who spoke yesterday, seem to want to go to kind of, I guess avoid that perhaps as a topic. Are you noticing the same thing?
Yeah, I actually think Cedric's story about what Nick Chubb came up and said to him after winning the national championship in the 2021 season, 22 was when the game was played, I think kind of perfectly encapsulates how a lot of people feel about this game. I think, there have been a lot of great photos taken during the Kirby Smart era. I think easily the saddest is the one in the national championship game in 2018 when you have Nick Chubb and Sony Michel just sort of sitting there with these 1,000-yard stares while confetti rains down after Alabama just won a national title. I very vividly remember in 2018, right before Jake Fromm had a Hail Mary attempt, Richard LeCounte sitting on the sideline and having that exact same stare after Alabama had come back and taken the lead and ultimately going to beat Georgia in that SEC championship game. I think it's a big reason why that first national championship will always mean so much, not just because it was the first national championship in 41 years, but because of the fact that they beat Alabama. And I was thinking about this myself yesterday, and you and I have been texting a little bit. Florida is an absolute dumpster fire right now. Georgia very clearly owns Tennessee. Auburn is a mess in and of itself and is a program that I don't think Georgia really fears all that much anymore. If they go out and they beat Alabama on Saturday, you're not going to be able to tell Georgia fans anything. They'll have won 2 straight national championships. They'll be in the process of trying to win their third. And they'll have, for the second straight time, beaten an Alabama team. And, Alabama fans can bring up, we didn't have Jamison Williams and we didn't have John Mechie and whatnot and all those injuries. Georgia goes out there and beats them again on Saturday. Beating someone 2 times, what is it? Once is a coincidence, twice isn't a fluke. I think that this game means a whole lot to this Georgia program. And to say this game has a national championship type feel, I actually don't think stresses enough just how big this game is for the Georgia program and what it means from sort of a nebulous standpoint. Because I do believe if Georgia, in the event they lose this game, and I don't believe they're going to, I don't think that they should be in the college football playoffs. You can throw all the chaos scenarios out at me. You can throw the conspiracy theories of ESPN still wanting to pitch that three-peat. Games have to be decided on the field, and if Georgia can't find a way to beat this Alabama team, a team I believe Georgia is better than and should beat on Saturday, I don't have much of an appetite to try and finagle a way to get Georgia into a playoff. I don't believe they should be in.
Certainly, we talked about a lot in the days ahead. How about the injury part of this? We heard from Nick Saban a moment ago. He's obviously expecting Brock Bowers to play. I think that's probably wise to do. I think we all kind of know what went down on Saturday with all of that. But some of the other injuries are a little bit more difficult to figure out here. What would your best – and by the way, the line from Kirby is everybody's sort of week to week right now. What is your best guess about – I guess let's start on the offensive side of the ball here, and we'll do defense as well. Starting with like Ladd McConkey, Tate Ratledge, Ra Thomas, is there a prevailing wisdom here, best guess about what the actual status of those offensive guys might be? And – is it safe to assume that Bowers really was held out this past Saturday for strictly a precautionary reason, and he's actually just as healthy as he appeared to be for the Ole Miss and the Tennessee game? Start with the offensive guys' injury situation there.
Yeah, I do believe Brock Bowers and Tate Ratledge are going to be able to play on Saturday. I think the fact that they dressed out showed that they're closer to being on the field, and I do believe that Bowers was held out for precautionary reasons. Why risk it? Why open himself up to more hits on that ankle when you don't need him to beat Georgia Tech, and that's ultimately what happened. The Ladd McConkey and Ra Thomas injuries, I think, are much more interesting and worth watching. Kirby Smart has played their status much closer to the vest. He has not been very forthcoming when asked about it, and that's obviously understandably his prerogative when it comes to that. But I do find it interesting that, Ladd's situation, again, we got a chance to talk to him after the Ole Miss game. He told us he felt good and he was fine after that. Then there's been conflicting things said from Kirby Smart on whether or not he practiced that next week. He goes back out, plays against Tennessee, plays, I believe, 6 snaps in that game, and having Zaprudered, in that film, it didn't seem anywhere where he really aggravated that injury or had it rolled up on. So it's curious to me sort of what his status is going to be. I don't expect him to be 100%. I think knowing Ladd, knowing him the way that we do and how much, playing for this program means for him, I do believe he's going to suit up on Saturday. I think he's going to try and play. I think it's probably going to be something closer to like what we saw against Auburn, where he's obviously not fully himself, but he's out there in key situations, as opposed to, say, the Florida game, the Missouri game, where he was, without a question, Georgia's top pass catcher that day. And so I think just having him out there and having Bowers out there as well, along with what we've seen from Dominic Lovett and Dylan Bell, I think is going to be more than enough for what this Georgia offense should have.
And you talked about, off air with me the other day, Dylan Bell, how impressed you've been with him. We've echoed some of that on the show there as well, that this seems like it's a real thing right now, Connor. This is, obviously we make a big deal about everything on this show, but the Bell emergence seems like it's got some staying power. And, I believe that Ladd McConkey's Georgia's best deep threat right now. I would certainly hate the idea of trying to beat Alabama without him, but if his absence creates more of an opportunity for Dylan Bell, that feels like a void that Bell is ready to fill in my mind. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll be really interested in watching with Bell is he's won a lot in tight coverage and made plays there. He had a touchdown wiped off the board because of a big catch that he made that was wiped off due to an ineligible man downfield penalty. He had a big catch against Tennessee in tight coverage. Alabama defenders are going to be all over him. They play very tight coverage. Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry are both very good cornerbacks. So I'll be interested in seeing how he holds up in that regard. But Georgia's shown that they're going to be creative in the ways they get Dylan Bell the football, whether it be, a touchdown pass he had against Tennessee, the reverse that he had against Georgia Tech. He's clearly a guy that Georgia feels comfortable using in a variety of ways. And I think is someone that Alabama needs to know where he is on the field at all times. I don't think that his emergence at this point of the season is a coincidence. He made some nice plays way back in the spring that sort of opened up some eyes in terms of what he could be. And he's taken advantage of some of the injuries that they've had at that wide receiver position late in the year. What is his ceiling yet? I don't really know, but I think the fact that you've seen him continue to get better and consistently make plays in this offense, I think is a really encouraging sign going into this game against Alabama. And one other wide receiver I'm interested in, and I'll note as well, Arian Smith has not had the year that I think a lot of us thought he was going to have, but he's taken on a bigger role in this Georgia offense of late, and that is something to me to at least keep an eye on. Alabama obviously knows how good his speed is and how difference-making that is, and I do think that just having him out there does open things up underneath, just because teams so clearly respect what he can do down the field. And if Alabama's going to make a choice and say, all right, we're going to watch Dylan Bell a little bit closely, and they're not focusing on Arian Smith, his speed, as we saw in that building last year against Ohio State, in games with elite athletes on the field, Arian Smith can be a difference maker. And so while, yes, Dylan Bell, I think is primed to have another large role for Georgia in this game, don't be surprised if Arian Smith makes a big play or two, even though he hasn't obviously had the season I think a lot of us thought he was going to have at the beginning of the year.
How about quickly on defense? My assumption is Jamon Dumas-Johnson's still injured. Maybe you'll tell me something different on that. I know Kirby was coy about that yesterday. Julian Humphrey had kind of a hopeful message on social media. Does that mean that there's kind of a growing sense that he could perhaps be coming back here? What's the overall snapshot on the defensive side when it comes to some of those injuries?
Yeah, I don't believe Jamon Dumas-Johnson is playing. I think his injury is a little bit more serious, a little bit more significant in terms of trying to get back out there. Humphrey is interesting. He sent that tweet that I'm sure we all saw with him just sort of celebrating and saying, "Go Dogs," shortly after Kirby Smart had literally been asked about him. And so Kirby had said he's week to week. I'll note that Julian was on the sideline in his jersey, didn't appear to be in a sling or have any sort of contraption on his shoulder, which is where the injury took place. I believe it was a collarbone injury there. So, I wouldn't be shocked if he dresses out. How much he plays, I don't know. I do think that Georgia would probably feel a lot more comfortable covering a guy like Isaiah Bond with someone like Julian Humphrey, who's just a more, pure cover corner, whereas I think Dalen Everett is a better tackler. But in a game like this where I think athleticism really matters, even having a guy like Julian Humphrey out there in some small way, I think would help Georgia and this defense with what they're going to be tasked to do because, Jalen Milroe likes to run around and extend plays, and you're going to be able to have to rotate in on the defensive side of the ball. So it's going to be all hands on deck on Saturday across all levels of the defense, not just on the defensive line where obviously Georgia rotates most heavily.
Let me try to squeeze one thing in before I let you go. Obviously, you never want to lose good assistant coaches. That's, it's kind of a pain, but it's also a practical reality when you have a bunch of good assistant coaches. It certainly seems, quite likely that Georgia could be on the verge of losing Fran Brown. Great promotion for him, becoming Syracuse head coach. I think that's a pretty good job, and I certainly think it's a very good job for a young coach like this. So, that is what it is. Good for Brown, never convenient for Georgia. But how about the immediate impact? Does this impact Ellis Robinson's recruitment? Does this impact Georgia's preparation for the Alabama game? What do you think the immediate impact, if anything, is if Brown really is on his way up to become Syracuse head coach?
Yeah, I think if Syracuse offers Fran Brown the head coaching job, I think you kind of have to take it. Going from a defensive backs coach and really even more specifically a cornerbacks coach in this Georgia defense to a Power 5 head coaching job, I think it's just something you can't really turn down. And Fran Brown has meant a lot to this Georgia program. He's had an obvious impact here in the short time he's been with the program, and I got a chance to talk with him last year at the Peach Bowl. I came away very impressed, and it's easy to see why not just his players love him, but administrators as well there. And I think he's going to potentially do very well at Syracuse. As far as Robinson, you can check out Jeff Sintel's story on DawgNation.com right now, speaking specifically to what that recruitment would look like if Fran Brown does, in fact, end up leaving. As Jeff lays out in his story, I don't want to give away all the goods, but Georgia fans should feel very confident in their ability to retain Ellis Robinson. I know he took a recent visit to Miami. I know Alabama has tried to push for him as well. But I think the relationships that Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart, two excellent defensive back coaches as well, I think are a big reason why Robinson is still likely to end up in Athens, even if Fran Brown does end up leaving there. And to your larger point, this is just sort of the reality that Georgia lives in. I will say with the defensive backs coach, this is nothing new for Kirby Smart. If Fran Brown does leave, this will be the fifth different defensive backs coach that he has to hire. There are obviously a lot of names being thrown out there right now. I think one to keep in mind, Doug Belk is someone that has been mentioned multiple times. And I believe he is currently about to be unemployed as Houston fired their head coach, Dana Holgerson. He's a guy with a lot of ties to the state of Texas and sort of that national recruiting blueprint that I think Georgia likes and wants going forward. So I think that's sort of the name to keep an eye on right now if Fran Brown does, in fact, end up leaving as the Syracuse head coach, has obviously been reported thus far.
All right, very quick. We don't have time for this today because there's 1,000 things going on, but you mentioned this off air last night. We had some folks in our comment section mention this today. The rumored date in October for the Georgia trip to Austin in the 2024 season coincides with the F1 race in Austin there as well. I'm not as well versed on F1 as many of my Gen Z friends are, but I do know what a disaster this was for the people out in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. This would obviously be a coveted first trip for Georgia to Austin, something a lot of UGA fans are looking forward to. This seems like an absolute disaster that should have been avoided, Connor, if such a big marquee SEC game in Texas' first year in the league coincides with a travel nightmare and logistical nightmare like a Formula One race. We don't have time for this. It's Georgia-Alabama week, but give me like 15, 20 seconds on this. Is this as bad as I think it's going to be?
If this is true, and this is the weekend that Georgia is playing there, Greg Sankey in the SEC absolutely drop the ball is not strong enough here. Formula One races are massive international business. That race alone traditionally brings between 300,000 and 400,000 people to the city of Austin every year. Like, as much as we talk about what SEC games bring to these cities, an F1 race triples that more often than not. And if this is true, and this is the date that they have picked, this is an absolute just poor planning on the SEC's part, because that is absolutely going to take away from the game. Traditionally, Texas has either had a bye this week or been on the road. There has not been a game in Texas, in Austin, the same weekend as this F1 race. And so if that ends up being correct, as Chris Lowe reported last night, this is going to make things very tough for the SEC and very tough for Georgia fans that day. And as someone who is both obviously an F1 fan and someone who has a rooting interest in Georgia, while it would be a great weekend for me because of the privilege that I get of covering this team and getting to be in Austin because it is my job, it's going to be really tough for a lot of people that want to make this a special trip, as I know a lot of people do. And from someone who has to do the logistics and go through this, it's going to be incredibly frustrating if this is what the SEC has decided on.
A story to watch in the future for sure. Connor, thanks for your time. We appreciate you being here, loving all the stuff you're writing there at DawgNation.com. Really, really cool week, and I can't wait to see you in downtown this weekend.
Yep, absolutely looking forward to it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we don't have time to do all of this today, and plus, not every Georgia fan's traveling to Austin anyway. But this was the type of thing that, I get asked about this all the time. Hey, when's this schedule coming out? DawgNation going to be doing something in Austin for the first ever trip for Texas and all that kind of stuff. And to find out that it's coinciding with a sporting event that hundreds of thousands of fans come in for, and almost all of those are out-of-town travelers, I don't think you could have planned this any worse. And I think that it's the kind of thing that'll probably be a very big deal as we move a little closer to the offseason. And offseason, by the way, which we hope starts a couple of months from now. But nonetheless, that's going to be a big story eventually. David Pollack coming up in about 5 minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, while travel plans for Austin can be a little bit frustrating, what's not frustrating is getting ready for all of the great things going down with Royal Caribbean. By the way, I'm going to get in so much trouble because our Christmas tree is covering up a Royal Caribbean. But we do have a Royal Caribbean ornament on the tree, so perhaps that makes up for the effect that the Christmas tree is covering up our advertiser graphic. The point is, though, there is some awesome, awesome things going down. And yesterday I got an email from Royal Caribbean. It's a true story. With my stateroom for January and my trip on Icon of the Seas. I believe I'm going to be among the very first people to ever step foot on the largest cruise ship in the world when it set sail there in January. It was delivered to the Port of Miami yesterday, so it's there. It's ready to go. This is a real thing. It is happening, and I can't wait to be a part of it. And if you want your own experience on board, call Jessica Slater. She's a great travel agent. She can help you out with that. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com for more on all the big things that Royal Caribbean's got going on here in 2024. Let's start with big news with the University of Florida here, where Billy Napier, obviously it's a disastrous season. Gators going to miss a bowl game here. And a lot of folks wonder what his long-term future is. That is to be determined. But you've also seen some really big issues with the Florida defense here this year. And a lot of folks kind of wondering, what does that mean for a guy like Austin Armstrong, who, when Armstrong was hired to begin this season, sort of treated as like the next big thing in coaching. He was going to be a position coach at Alabama. This is clearly a guy that's thought to have a very bright future in coaching. It was thought to be a little bit of a coup when Florida hired him, and yet a lot of Florida fans kind of soured on Armstrong a little bit based on the performance this season. Ultimately, though, it's not Armstrong who takes the fall for the Florida defensive struggles. It's going to be a couple of assistants, and one of these is a former big-time name, Corey Raymond. We mentioned him off the top of the show. This is one of the guys who really made LSU what it was sort of thought of to be, DBU, when it was kind of called that. Raymond had a great reputation there as a defensive backs coach. Came to Florida as kind of the sort of aggressive hire that an energetic coach like Napier is supposed to make. But it has not worked out, and now Raymond is out of a job there, as is Sean Spencer, the defensive line coach. You sort of wonder what that means for L.J. McCray. I don't know. Perhaps the check is already cashed, and therefore the defensive line coach is a mere formality. But either way, an example of just how bad it is for Florida after a second season. There are two ways that you can lose coaches. You can be so successful that those guys leave and go become head coaches, or you can be so unsuccessful that you're forced to fire them and look for replacements. And after 2 years on the job, Billy Napier obviously in a situation where he's having to look for replacements here. And it gives you an idea of the fact that there's thus far in the Napier era a little bit of a failure to launch. Now, the 2024 recruiting class looks pretty good, but Texas A&M will tell you, one recruiting class alone is not enough to change the balance of a roster. It's just not. That you have to populate your good recruits with, a successful collection of veteran players. And right now, Florida doesn't really have those. For everything you want to blame, Florida fans would like to blame on Dan Mullen for the failure to have a really impressive roster. The honest truth is that Napier's own inability to kind of, collect big-time transfers have been a big issue there. That is what Florida's dealing with. I'll also give you this really quickly as we wrap this up. College Football Playoff Top 25 re-released here tonight. Probably not a ton of drama ahead of this, but obviously looking ahead to what's going to go down on Sunday. We'll be live when the final names are announced at that point in time, and we'll see, who all does make it. I guess there's a tiny chance you can make a case for Michigan becoming the first team this season to be the top 4 team. Perhaps they could move ahead of Georgia at number 1. My suspicion is they probably don't do that. We'll see if, most of this is probably just going to be kind of cemented in place there ahead of, what's going to happen on Sunday. But obviously all of the discussion on TV tonight, a little bit of a precursor to, okay, well, what spots are occupied? What spots are ready? How does, how is this Final Four going to be decided? The ultimate assumption is when it comes to the Pac-12 title game there on Friday night, that's Washington and Oregon. They are likely playing for a spot. The notion that if Florida State can win the ACC, a Louisville team that just lost to Kentucky, obviously Florida State's expected to win that game. Do they get a chance to move in there as a 13-0 team? Conventional wisdom seems to suggest they will. How about the other spots? Obviously, that's some of the debate that will go on TV tonight and for us here over the course of the next few days there as well. But in terms of Georgia's ability to be in the college football playoff, a lot of that hinges on beating Alabama there on Saturday. Let's talk more about how they get that done. Welcome in one of the great former Georgia Bulldogs, and always a guy that's a privilege when we're able to have him on our program there as well. It is David Pollack here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG Today. David, thanks for spending some time with us. It's good to have you on the show here today.
Great to be on, BA.
Well, let's start with this. One of the things that we kind of lean on you for is your knowledge of the defensive side of the ball, and you've kind of given us caution before that when you lose 5 first-round picks off the 2021 team or a Jalen Carter off the 2022 team and a Nolan Smith, that eventually you kind of feel the effects of that a little bit. Is that what's going on right now? Like, why do you think Tech game on Saturday, other games this year, why do you think Georgia's had the issue with the running quarterbacks and the issue at times just sort of stopping the run in general? Is this about, honest to goodness, just talent attrition, or do you think there's kind of something else going on there?
It's weird feeling human again, huh?
Yeah.
Like we had a couple years of superhuman play from some absolute freak shows that were great players, but you can't find those every year. And here's the thing I'll say about the defense. First, you lose those guys. It's very hard now to plug in new guys who are younger, obviously up front, that can even remotely do some of the same things that those other guys could do. So it's a learning curve. On the edges, I think we're vastly different than we've been in the past. So it's a combination of attrition. It's a combination of some youth, but it's also we were so good for so long. The expectations raised and raised and raised, and now realistically, this is not a defense that's going to pitch shutouts. This is not a defense that's not going to give up points, and you're going to feel comfortable with every single situation. But the good news is you got an offense that's elite and really, really good, and they can score on anybody. So it's kind of rich people problems to have right now.
No, that's exactly the case. So when you look at Jalen Milroe on Saturday, the conventional wisdom is, well, if Georgia's had these issues with other running quarterbacks, then Milroe, who's the best runner they faced thus far this season, and that's an even more significant challenge. Like, how much do you kind of buy into that, and how much, I guess, are you kind of settled in on the notion that on Saturday, Milroe's going to get some at some times, and what does Georgia do to possibly limit him?
Well, Milroe's definitely going to get some. But I think the quarterbacks that we struggle with the most are the quarterbacks with the ability to read things. And I say that, you look at this past weekend, right? Like, they had the ability to read, put the quarterback in the belly, make a read, make a secondary read, make a couple reads on a play. That's not what this offense is. Caleb King can do that at Georgia Tech. That's not what Milroe is. Milroe will do some of that. You've seen some of that triple option type of stuff, but it's not as diverse and it's not as detailed as Auburn's or as Georgia Tech's that we've seen, or even as Ole Miss. So, but here's the thing about Milroe. This offense, Milroe throws the deep ball as well as anybody in the country. Okay? You see the dynamic ability and the running ability of the athlete. He throws a phenomenal deep ball. That thing is on point. By the way, ask Auburn, right? Like, late in the game, great deep ball. He throws it awesome. So you have to take away the deep ball, the deep shots, because he's good at it. He's not good at the intermediate stuff. He's not great throwing in windows. So what is the priority? We got to prioritize making sure that he can't run the football. But with their drop back passing game, it's taking shots, so it's making you drop out. But then all of a sudden, now he can take off and run. So he gives you a little bit of everything. This offense gives you a little bit of everything. They don't major in what Tech does and what Auburn did to us to be very successful. So I think our plan can be a little bit better. But Jalen Milroe is going to get his for sure.
You mentioned Georgia's offense a moment ago. What I've kind of said, David, is I believe this might be the most explosive offense of this kind of championship era for Georgia. No disrespect to Stetson Bennett or Todd Monken or guys who helped, achieve great things for Georgia the last couple of years. Something about this offense's ability to throw punches just feels a little bit different to me. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's got serious pop. And listen, the possessions per game are down. But the effectiveness is not. And when you look at it, it's those deep over routes, those deep crossing routes that Carson Beck is so good at. And by the way, that ball gets there in a hurry, BA. Like that thing, he snaps his wrist, and that thing is there 9,000. I mean, the dude can go through a car wash and not get it wet. I mean, he's got a hose. So I think his arm strength allows you to stretch the middle of the field big time. Bowers is a piece that can work the middle of the field that requires extra attention. Ladd, he's got to get healthy. Expect to see him back this week. But this offense has definitely had great balance. Offensive line is shuffled around up front, but Dejon and Milton. By the way, Milton, kudos to that cat. Like he has been toting the rock, and he's really. I think the coolest thing about him is what he's understood is he's starting to understand. Make a cut and go. I don't need to dance. I don't need to stop my feet. I'm a big, strong sucker with long strides, and I'm going to get downhill. And since he's done that, he's become better. So a lot of weapons, a lot of different ways to beat you, a lot of things to make you think about. And Alabama will challenge them. But they got a lockdown corner with McKinstry out wide. They can rush the passer. This is a really, really good defense. It might be the best defense Georgia's faced all year long.
Yeah, I think you may be right about that. David, we remember you as a very intense player. You're one of those guys sort of play with your hair on fire or whatever, like the cliche that people want to use is. In a game like this, I mean, I feel like the intensity in terms of the buildup is sort of already off the chart. So, kind of put yourself in the position of a player maybe on either side Saturday of, is this one of those things where you want to kind of dial your intensity up to like 11 on a scale of 1 to 10, or because the intensity is already so high, are you feeling like you need to kind of dial it down and kind of find a way to be more calm in the midst of a potentially chaotic environment? From a mindset standpoint, what's the right way for a player to approach this?
Well, it depends who you are. Like, that's one of the coolest things about being in locker rooms and seeing, man, everybody gets prepared for a game different. Some people want to crank up AC/DC as loud as you possibly can and go nuts. And then there's people like me that listen to Big Daddy Weave Christian music before I went out to calm myself because I knew I was about to throw a lot of energy all over the place. So I think you got to know yourself. But I think it's interesting dynamic this game because you've got the new king of college football, and a lot of people have talked about that. Georgia, two-time national champs, the standard now. They passed the old standard, which was Alabama. And so I think Alabama is going to be extremely motivated. One thing that's crazy, BA, is out of all the things in this game, I think Alabama's defense is better than Georgia's. I think Georgia's offense is better than Alabama's defense. Out of all the things in the game, the one thing that I can really say with confidence is Georgia's the best coached team. Georgia's a better coached team than Alabama is. And I say that because Georgia doesn't beat itself with turnovers and penalties consistently for the last couple of seasons. They find a way. It's the most unbelievable thing that you can be disciplined and you can be tough and you can be physical and have these five-star kids with flash and all the stuff, but get them to all speak your language. And Kirby's done a great job of that. And that's crazy to say coming in this matchup a couple years ago, 5 years ago, that Nick Saban would be out-coached by anybody. But to me, Kirby's proven that his program and the way he runs it, they're the standard. And now Alabama gets to go, okay, just don't forget about us, homeboy.
So I'll finish with this. Last year, Nick Saban sitting right next to you on television when you kind of talked about the sea change that had taken place in the sport. that clip went incredibly viral. It's like the most talked about moment probably from the national championship game. Did you have an idea at the time that so many people were going to, I guess, make such a big deal about the fact that I believe you correctly noted that there had been an amazing shift in college football, and yet because of the poignance of the moment, Saban sitting right there next to you, people just really seem to talk about that. Were you aware at the time of how much people really were kind of bringing that up, and the fact that even a year later, people still kind of talk about that?
No, man, I didn't have a clue. And it didn't hit me, by the way, that night because, me and Nick are on set, and we walk off set, go back to your rooms, you finished it all up. The next morning, I did Get Up, and I'm doing a Get Up hit with Greeny, and all of a sudden he plays the clip, and everybody's, like, laughing and going nuts. I'm like, oh, crap. Like, this might be a bigger deal than I thought. I didn't even think about it. Like, first of all, the game's over.
Right.
Like, there's, we're at halftime. Dad talked about Stetson, so he covered that. Now it's like the natural progression was Georgia's the best team in college football, and it's not even close when you win, back-to-back natties. So very, very interesting moment. It went viral. I picked up, like, gazillions of followers just to lose them because they realized, like, I'm not really that guy. I'm not going to be the guy to, like, gaslight and blow people up. Like, it was just an honest take and an honest moment. But, no, I called Nick. I actually, texted Nick, and he doesn't text very much, so I set up a call the next night with him, and he was like, no, I was not the least bit offended. So it wasn't a moment to try to offend Nick or make a big stand. It was just an honest opinion that, Georgia's taking over that mantle. And listen, you're crazy if you don't think Nick and them are going to use that, right? Like, that's going to be part of the conversation going into this week of everybody talking about how Georgia's the standard, and you're not.
It's fascinating stuff, David. We certainly appreciate your time, and we love a lot of the things you're doing right now. You've obviously got a great podcast out there where you're kind of sharing some of the stories of your own faith and how that's influencing you as a father and as a coach and all the things you've got going on. And obviously, you're doing some great work with your foundation there as well. So for people who kind of want to know more about, some of the ways in which you're using your fame and some of the things you have going on right now, how can people kind of find you online and find some of the stuff you've got going on?
Well, we got the PollackFamilyFoundation.com, and we just did our Banquet of Blessings, which was one of the coolest things we've ever done.
Amazing.
I mean, we rented out the Classic Center for a night and brought in a bunch of the people in need in the community, and ended up close to 1,000 people. And we fed them all, we served them all their drink, we served them all their food. It had a swag bag full of a brand new coat, brand new gloves, brand new beanie, brand new scarf, brand new sleeping bag, all the wipes, toothbrush, all the things you possibly, could want, wool socks during this time of year. So we're just trying to find areas that we can make our community here better and plug in. So that's a lot of fun. And the Family Goals podcast is just for dads trying to figure this thing out.
Yeah.
Like mom's trying to figure this thing out because we ain't got to figure
That's
it out.
all of us, by
like,
the way. You really, that's all of us, by the way.
Oh yeah, I mean, just trying to find ways to incorporate, our church and be godly men and try to be the best father and husband and follower of God that we can be. So we get to throw down with that stuff, man. It's been fun, but it's always fun talking some college football too, brother.
David, I really appreciate it. We love to have you on the program and hope you enjoy the game this weekend. We hope to get a chance to catch up with you very soon as well.
All right, thank you, brother.
Good stuff there from David Pollack. And I tell you, I've been a Georgia fan, obviously my entire life, and the thing that I love about the fandom, and many of you probably, kind of come to the same conclusion, that so many of the guys that we've cheered for this entire time, right? It's like when you get a chance to get to know them and you get a chance to sort of see what they're about as adults and sort of their post-playing career life, you realize, man, Georgia over the course of a good number of years has just been so good at kind of growing up good dudes, right? And Kirby Smart has his way of doing that now. Prior to that, Mark Richt had his way of doing that. Coach Don and Coach Goff, they had their ways doing that. Obviously, Coach Dooley had his ways of doing that too. But, so many of the guys that have come through this program, you're not only proud of the football memories that you have of watching them play, but you're also very, very proud of the fact that, hey, every cheer I ever spent, on that guy turned out to be very much worth it because of the man he turned out to be. And there's a lot of examples of that at Georgia. And obviously you hear David Pollack there using his fame for such a good reason and seemingly having the time of his life right now. Being involved, I know he's heavily involved like North Oconee football program and obviously, kind of with his kids, they're kind of getting to a cool age. Just a really, really fun thing to be able to see. So I love having David on the show. His insight on the game, very very valuable, right? Because it kind of comes from an honest place. Here's what Georgia does really well. Here's what Alabama does really well. These two teams are about to collide, and we'll see how it all shakes out, which is kind of what it's about on a week like this. So really, really good stuff there with David Pollack. Now, speaking of good stuff, to wrap things up here today, many of you still making those last-minute travel plans for Atlanta there on the weekend. As you're thinking about that hotel room, I want you to think about right here in the Dunwoody area where we're lucky to broadcast from each and every day. Nestled in between two MARTA stations, that means easy to get to downtown for the game. If you want to go to Buckhead for some shopping or something like that, or just some nightlife, you can do that. But if you want to kind of stay like right here in the Dunwoody area, there's plenty of shopping and dining and all that kind of stuff right here there as well. There's also like 2,000 hotel rooms, which means you can get great savings because of the options that are available. And if you want to have a great meal, you get the fine dining, you got like the more sort of quick service, everything kind of in between, trendy, fast, the farm to table type, whatever. All of that here in the Dunwoody area. Plus, it's a great shopping experience itself, too. There are like 300 different stores to look at. There's a wonderful mall. There's all kinds of great ways to kind of get stocked up for the Christmas gifts that you need, but to also just have a great weekend and enjoy yourself here in Atlanta, and then get on the MARTA train and just go right to Mercedes-Benz Stadium there on Saturday. So if you want to kind of make this a part of your travel plans, or if you just want to do a holiday shopping weekend on the other side of the SEC championship, that's good too. Discover Dunwoody.com/DawgNation. Discover Dunwoody.com/DawgNation. And if you're coming in from the airport, obviously MARTA can take you right here to Dunwoody too, which is amazingly convenient. You avoid all that Atlanta traffic. Discover Dunwoody.com/DawgNation for more on that. All right, so really good full show today. Y'all, we're going to do this every single day. We're expecting Jake Fromm tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun. We're going to have Brad Nessler on Thursday. Brad will share some insight on what it's going to feel like to call the final game ever of the SEC on CBS. So it's a big week for us here on DawgNation Daily, as you would assume that it would be. And we are obviously very, very grateful to have you as a part of it there as well. And grateful to share golden shoes with you, too, because so many of you are so kind to let us know about special moments you have going on in your life, including our winner for today, our golden shoe, going to Scott Harris, who says, we celebrated our mom's 80th birthday in Jekyll Island this past weekend. First of all, what a great place to spend a birthday, and how about 80 years there? Scott says, biggest dog fan and grandmother of the Dog Nation's own, Jack Leo. Jack's one of our great colleagues around here, does a lot of work with us, super sharp guy, a great friend of mine, too, there as well. And so his grandmother turns 80 years old. How about that birthday cake, too? What a cool thing that is. Well-designed. Boy, I'd like to have a piece of that right now. That looks really, really good. So, Scott, thanks for sharing that. Jack, congratulations to your grandmother. 80 years old. Wonderful birthday party going down. You love to see that. Let me tell you what you don't love to see, though. The lousy stinking Gators and the absolute mess they've made of their program. You got players spitting on other players and all that kind of stuff. It never ends. It's just a cycle of embarrassment. And it's been 1,116 days since they've beaten Georgia. And we think that number's going to keep going up and up and up and up. You better believe that's the case. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We will see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. The R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. And by the way, how good was David Pollack today? Behind the scenes, his relationship with Nick Saban after what went down in the national championship game last year. Incredible story about that. Also, really good insight into what it takes to stop a Jalen Milroe and how realistic it is that Georgia could have some success doing that on Saturday. I feel like that is strong stuff there on that. All right, I'm going to start on DawgNation.com today. And then we'll kind of roll through here and we'll see what kind of comments we can get and try to give you a good full boat's worth of comments here for a few moments. By the way, we talked about Ellis Robinson and Fran Brown a little earlier. Jeff looks like he's got a good story up on that at DawgNation.com here right now. DT says that Saban's getting so much credit for turning his team's season around. Instead, I say, wanted to get off track and that it needed to be turned around. Saban should have done a better job earlier this season. I think that's fair. We said yesterday that there's definitely this narrative being pushed of, oh, my gosh, this is a completely different Alabama team now than it was at the beginning of the year. But that only seems true to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're not playing Texas right now. They played them earlier this year. And to me, this is one of the ways in which Texas, I believe, has been unfairly denigrated, this idea of, well, Texas may have beat them in September, but they wouldn't want to play them in November. Like how first of all, there's nothing I hate more than a hot take about a hypothetical scenario. That's something that's definitely not coming true. I can't stand that. And that's an example of that. Part of the reason why we think that Alabama was bad in September is because Texas was beating them up. And if they weren't playing Texas in September, then people perhaps would not think the same thing about Alabama. And then you say, what about the South Florida game? Look, we don't get into every rumor that's out there because we try to be at least, as careful as we possibly can be. But we also jokingly say we're a lot more free to run with rumors about other programs than we are about Georgia. We just sort of feel like that's probably a little bit more fair game. Y'all know the rumor. The rumor was that Jalen Milroe was benched before the South Florida game, that he pouted during practice. He was benched during the game. And that's when they started, what's-his-face, the one from Buckner from Notre Dame, that Milroe had bad body language during practice. And therefore, they try to send that message. So, the idea that they were doing whatever for the South Florida game, a lot of that was the fact that they knew Milroe was their best guy, but they needed Milroe to be a little bit more bought in than he was after the Alabama game, in which he did play bad. And they were looking, I think, for some other options during practice that week, I think anyway, if I had to guess. And they didn't have them. I mean, that's the whole deal, is that, in 2022, Nick Saban thought he was going to be cute, and he thought he was going to build a championship roster using the transfer portal because they brought in Jamison Williams. That had really worked. And so if this works to bring in one good transfer, what if we bring in like 7 transfers? Well, it didn't work. Like Alabama kind of lost its culture there a little bit. And, from a talent standpoint, this is not anywhere near as talented an Alabama team as existed in the past. But that's not the statement that people think that it is, because the truth is you actually don't need as much talent as Alabama has typically had in order to win a championship. In other words, this Alabama team is not as talented as previous Alabama teams, but a less talented Bama team is still almost more talented than anybody else, and it's still a pretty tough fight with Georgia. And it's one of those things where you let the chips fall where they may. But, part of the issue for Alabama, why it hasn't always looked as easy for them, is because from a talent standpoint, they are not as talented as they've been. That's just seemingly true. Keith Dog asking about the ESPN thing. So ESPN made significant salary reductions, and they made a special point of just to be completely honest, they made a special point of not just like nibbling around the edges and low-level staffers that are not on camera and things like that. They made a significant point about really going into sort of the higher ranks of their most famous talent and reducing a lot of them, because that's where a lot of the salary was sort of, located, right? That's like the nucleus of their overall, payroll was where a lot of these sort of high, value, very famous analysts. And it wasn't just Pollack. I mean, a lot of people made a big deal about Jeff Van Gundy being off the NBA broadcast, and you can sort of cite a lot of examples of that. There have been several rounds of these where ESPN has just greatly reduced its overall talent level. It's not an evaluation about Pollack in general, because we all obviously believe David's a great analyst, and I think ESPN thought that too. But ESPN was in some major financial trouble. Major financial trouble. That's not an overstatement. They are in a major financial issue. Vince Noir says that the SEC championship game riding on the Dogs' offensive line. Yeah, I mean, both in terms of opening up the holes for the running game and making sure that what has been true for Kendall Milton the last couple of weeks remains true against a good Bama defensive front like Tim Smith and all those guys up there. But also blocking Dallas Turner is a pretty big deal. And so you got to try to find a way to do that. Laura Raines says, after Milroe made the embarrassing rant about the Heisman, I'm confident the Dogs are going to be on top on Saturday. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing you would never hear from Georgia, and you used to wouldn't hear that from Alabama. But maybe that's an example of how things have changed. Laura, you may be right. Burrock Dog on the idea of ESPN and the controversial type stuff. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the case. But, I mean, there are also a lot of straightforward analysts that also, kind of got dropped on that too. I mean, the point is just a lot of people lost their job. I mean, at ESPN, a lot of famous analysts across all sports, kind of got dropped there. I mean, and by the way, this is like not the first round of that went on. There were several rounds of that took place. Over here on Facebook. Mike Mazzell says you stop Milroad. He calls him Milroad. You stop Turner and you win the game. I mean, it's about that simple, probably. It really is. It's about that simple. And, Turner's just so quick. I mean, even when they had Will Anderson Jr., I always kind of thought that Turner was almost just as dangerous, and I obviously still think that right now. Billy Mathis asking about Austin Blasky. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have kind of brought up Blasky as of late, but I think this is a combination of a couple things. Blasky was a little bit banged up at one point in time. Georgia, I think, has found a rotation along the offensive line that works. And while Blasky's got a lot of value for Georgia at a multitude of positions, look what's happened. Like Monroe Freeling seems to have emerged as like a pretty important backup at, like, say, right tackle. Xavier Truss is a guy that you feel like you can play perhaps at either tackle spot if you really needed to. It seems like Jared Wilson. I mean, at one point in time, you kind of thought, well, maybe Blasky is your next center. And I won't pretend to be an expert on what's going on here, but it seems like Jared Wilson's kind of emerged there a little bit. I mean, and you say, well, how do we go from Blasky almost beating out Ernest Green to not playing at all? Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. But if you just look at it individually, it sort of makes a little bit more sense just, based on the, I guess, the number of, sort of the number of guys that have emerged at sort of different slots. It's a fair question. I mean, and if you can read between the lines, then you probably, are going to say, well, what's going to happen next week with a guy like that? It's probably a fair question. I honestly don't know the answer, but I understand why it's being asked. Daniel Irvin Wells says defensive line is my key. Says cannot let them get the run game going. Put it on Milroe's arm. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those games where, like, we're going to talk about this in the regular show at some point in time because John Stinchcomb brought up something yesterday I think is really important. He mentioned the Ohio State game. And the point I've always made about the Ohio State game is that was, by every description, a bad game for Georgia defensively. But they still had 4 sacks, right? It's like in a game in which the other team is scoring, anything you do defensively still matters. And Georgia found a way to do a few things that mattered in that game. They found a way a couple of times to get off the field, and it turned out to be like really valuable. And so that's kind of the thing for Milroe. Instead of sacks, maybe it's more like tackles for loss, right? Or like tackles for no gain, or something like that, where keeping that contained. You assume like your more athletic edge players like the McKells and the Marvin Jones Jr., who we saw have kind of a nice moment. You assume some of that becomes really important in a game like this, and we'll see if that is indeed the case. Graham Nicholson says also got to avoid no 4th and 31 situation, which is true. Craig Jones says we have to spy Milroe to control the edges. Kirby talked about that a little bit yesterday, and the thing that Kirby said yesterday was that if you're spying the quarterback, you're not stopping the quarterback run, which, we've said this before during our R.S. Andrews cooldown. There was a really good coaching clinic thing from Kirby one time about dealing with mobile quarterbacks, and he was kind of making fun of media people who always want to spy quarterbacks, whatever. And some of this was sort of over my head a little bit, but, basically around the idea that, I guess the way to explain what Kirby was, kind of saying this is that if you're spying with the quarterback, you're sort of taking that guy out of the play. At that point in time, you're almost like playing with 10 because this guy's spying the quarterback. That if you really want to go stop the quarterback run, I think what he's trying to say is you got to go after the quarterback. You got to go get him. So, perhaps, quarterback spy is not, quite as valuable as you might think that it would be. Maybe the better word is more along the lines of quarterback contain. But, and this is what that coaching clinic that I saw that one time was sort of about, is there's also a way to play quarterback contain that ends up not being aggressive enough. And that's what everybody says that Auburn got beat on that 4th and 31 play or whatever it was, is that they're only rushing 2. They're using a defensive lineman to spy Milroe. And, now your concern about his legs all of a sudden is making you, less than as aggressive as you should be in terms of getting after the quarterback. You got to try to find a way to do both. Alan Verbanchik says, I bet JDJ plays with a cast. He has the best experience, and he knows how to read the offense and get the defense. So I will tell you this, Alan, you may turn out to be right, But Kirby was asked directly about this a couple of weeks ago, and he said that JDJ could not play with a cast. He said that would not work. So maybe that changes for Saturday, but I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Kirby was saying that he didn't think JDJ could play with a cast. Gary Holt, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate that. Checking out here today. Philip Jordan Wells says you got to run the old Tampa, Baltimore, Michael Vick defense. It says I saw it as a Dome employee for years. Yeah, that's a good point, Philip. I guess you go back and watch some of those deals. And obviously, while Milroe is, a good runner, he's not a, Kirby compared him yesterday to Lamar Jackson. I would say that's not quite what we're talking about here. Or certainly a Michael Vick running level quarterback. But in the NFL, we have seen these defenses sort of key to stop these guys for sure. Brandon Dawson says, if UGA were to lose, and I don't think they should, but it would still be insane to not know they're a top 4 team. Yeah, I mean, our approach on this is going to be this. There is obviously a very legitimate argument to be made that if Georgia were to lose the game, it does not deserve to go to the college football playoff. Like, someone could make that argument and then make it sound good. I totally acknowledge that. Here's what I can promise you. On this show, we will not be making that argument, even though it has some legitimacy to it, makes some sense, sounds like it could be true. On this particular case, there will be plenty of people who choose to make that argument. So understand now, I am telling you that we're not going to feign objectivity about this come Sunday if it were to happen. Now, I really hope we don't have to worry about it because I think there's a very good chance that no matter how hard we argue for the Georgia side of this, it ends up not being true and Georgia could be excluded. But we are going to make the pro-Georgia argument if it needs to be made, because if we don't, who will, right? So that's the approach we're going to take if it comes down to that. There is a legitimate argument for a lot of things, but we will argue the partisan Georgia side if need be. And we really, really hope it's not necessary, as you know. Craig Jones says the Florida State spot is almost interchangeable with the 5 to 8 teams. Yeah, I mean, I do genuinely believe that Texas is the better team than Florida State. It's important to note this. The one thing the committee's never done, and this committee over the course of years, because the committee's been made up of different people, of course, this committee over the years has had a lot of inconsistency. They do one thing one year, they do something else the next. They just kind of do whatever they want to do. The one thing consistently, though, what they have done is they have chosen, I'm going to use big words here for a moment. The committee has chosen quantitative analysis over qualitative analysis. What that means is the committee does not try to decide which teams are better. Now, I know its bylaws say the 4 best teams. This committee couldn't figure out the 4 best teams if you give them 6 months. They don't know. And people say, what about the ex-coaches? I've said this for years. The ex-coaches don't have power to do squat. Jim Grobe is on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Jim Grobe no more picks the playoff teams than I do. The ex-coaches exist as sort of like packing peanuts around the actual decision makers, which are the athletic directors. The only people that have any power to put a team in the college football playoff are the athletic directors. There may be a meeting that takes place in Grapevine, Texas, of the entire committee, but I can promise you there is a meeting before the meeting in which the actual playoff teams are selected, and that's done by the athletic directors. You can put Condoleezza Rice on there. You can put Jim Grobe on there. You can put anybody you want to on there. None of those people have power to do anything. There's not a single one of those non-ADs that's ever actually picked a playoff team. I'm not sure if they know that or not, but I can promise you that's true. But the point is, the prevailing logic of the committee over the course of all of these years has always been something that kind of approximates quantitative analysis over qualitative analysis. In other words, they're not actually trying to decide who the better teams are. They start by counting losses. And they put the 0-loss teams in a category and the 1-loss teams in a category and then the 2-loss teams in a category. And there's never been an example of, well, we think so-and-so, is better team as a one-loss team over so-and-so, the zero-loss team. You just don't see that, right? There's no two-loss team that's ever made it, even though there have been plenty of instances, sometimes Georgia, sometimes not, where a two-loss team was perhaps one of the 4 best teams in America. But if you've got 2 losses, you're not making the playoff because that's the kind of quantitative analysis they do. They count losses. That's too many. So in the category of 0 losses, here's what happens. In the category of 1 loss, here's what happens. Now, within the 1-loss category, they feel free to say, we think this team's better than that team. But they don't jump a team into a new category ahead of a team that has fewer losses. They've never done that. I don't believe they ever will. That's just not what they do. All right, let me go over here. And we'll take some comments on YouTube. Matt Presley says, what's your biggest key to the game for a Georgia win? I believe Georgia's got to score at least 35 points. I believe at least 35. 30 might take more than that, but 35 seems like a good, safe number. You know, we talked for a while about, magic number was 13. Georgia had Florida game coming up, Tennessee game coming up, Ole Miss game coming up, Missouri game coming up. We said, hey, can Georgia give up no more than 13 points in any of those games? And if it does, then it guarantees itself probably a chance to be undefeated. And we kind of used that on the basis of that's a slightly less than what Georgia had been averaging for the season, but the same amount that Georgia had given up Tennessee in 2022, a far better offense than any of the teams that Georgia was facing on that stretch. Well, Georgia didn't give up 13 points in any of those games. Well, I guess the Tennessee game they did. But other than that, they gave up more points than that. They ended up averaging – somebody mentioned this to me on Twitter the other day. We called for 13. They actually gave up about 17. That's actually pretty close to what we called for, which for the most part is true. The Florida touchdown to get to 20 was a garbage score and things like that. So it was fairly close to that. But it is still, when you factor in like Tech games and things like that, this is still a defense that's giving up a little bit more than previous Georgia defenses have given up. I thought David Pollack said it very well earlier. All of us are like, what, human, normal behavior? Defenses that are hoping to get stops but don't have stops guaranteed? And I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being serious. That's what a lot of us have had to get used to. Is this the Georgia defense that's good, that's really good? May still be the best, maybe, but it's normal. It's not abnormal. It's not the Avengers the way that the 2021 team was. And that means that in a day like this, you probably need to get to 35. I go back to the South Carolina game. On that day, we came on the Monday after and said, Georgia just flat out didn't score enough points. And it's not about slow starts or whatever else. No matter when the drought came in terms of not scoring, the actual truth is you got to score more points than this in order to really make yourself a championship contender. You can't be in the 20s in the SEC because that foreshadows what will likely be, problems for you in the postseason. We use, previous examples of previous Georgia teams to sort of cite our case for that. Well, guess what? That's not what Georgia was offensively. I don't know if that's Carson Beck growing into the role or whatever the actual, reason for it was. But what Georgia showed itself to be defensively, or I should say offensively then, they are far better than that now. This is a team that I believe could score on Saturday every bit, whatever number of points it needs to score. But 35 is probably the benchmark. If Georgia's 35, 36, 37, and heading towards 40, then it's probably going to win this football game. If its final score starts with a 2, that might not be a good thing. Let's go asking where we're going to be on Saturday. So we'll be in the Home Depot backyard. Now, as far as like where that is in relation to other things, I am not great with that kind of stuff. I am not very good with like directions. But we'll be in the Home Depot backyard having a great time. Now, unfortunately, that is a ticketed event, unfortunately. But if you're around there, I'd love to come by and say hello to you and do all that kind of stuff. I'd absolutely love to do that. So let's go. If you can make your way over to the Home Depot backyard, I'd love to see you. I really would. Beer Cans and Batty says that Texas dropped 34 in the Gumps, and they did it on the road. So that's a pretty good benchmark for what Georgia ought to be capable of. I think you're right. Thomas Tyson, this is a good point, says that Bobo wants to avenge 2012. I like that. Thomas Van Santa always, and I always pronounce this wrong. It's Vancevan. Thomas told me this the other day. And now I think I'm messing it up again. But he says that Bullard gets an interception, which I like too. Caleb Myers wondering when the Dogs win the national title if Jimbo Fisher will still be back on breaking the game down from his couch, which is very funny. Obviously a reference to the coach's film room from a year ago. Lesko says, is it possible Jace McClellan absence a huge deal? Yeah, I think it is. We probably haven't talked about it enough. Alabama, for whatever reason this year, just hasn't had tremendous depth with its running back. So I think it's probably true. Let's see what else. Go Dog says, stopping quarterbacks like Milroe and the Vic of the world, you have to have a freakish defensive tackle, linebacker, and defensive end all on one defense. In the Vic era, at Atlanta, Baltimore, Tampa, they had that combination. It's a pretty good point. I mean, like, we don't really think about football being a one-on-one sport the way we think about basketball being, right? And one of the reasons why basketball has so much popularity with so many people is because individual names, just people just kind of like individual stars. Basketball cultivates individual stars. But when you're talking about this kind of football, the individual star stuff does sort of step out, and it does become a little bit less of a true team game in that particular instance. So I think what some of us who are Georgia fans are hoping for is that some of like the really special athletes that Georgia has defensively who will give you a little bit of a flash here and there, that maybe like just their very best moment happens there on Saturday, which is obviously a possibility, right? And I mean, I don't always have a great explanation for why sometimes Georgia's very best performances have come in its very biggest games. I don't always have a great explanation for that, but at times it's happened. That's not the same thing as saying, and therefore I know it's going to happen this Saturday as well. I don't know anything. But you do need, as the commenter mentioned, you got to have, if Milroe is a freakish athlete who can do freakish things, then you got to have somebody on the other side who's also willing and able to do some freakish things too. I think you're right about that. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, BA still step, Bobo hating the fan base. Only reason I can think is that there's still in the water is that people are too proud to admit they were wrong. I was wrong. Happy to say that I was. Yeah, Paul, from my standpoint, I haven't heard as much of that lately, but to me, that's what it comes down to. And I always kind of jokingly say I have strong opinions loosely held. Like, I never want to get so boxed in on an opinion that all of a sudden I would rather be right than have Georgia do well. Like, the stakes in my own opinion, I give opinions for a living. And even then, the stakes of my own opinions are just not high enough for me to want unhappiness as a way of proving that I was right. But you know how, I mean, listen, whether it be comment sections like ours, message boards, which there are obviously plenty of, or social media back and forth, like, people just get entrenched in their corner. And sometimes that's Georgia fan versus Bama fan, but a lot of this is Georgia fan versus Georgia fan, or maybe Bama fans versus Bama fans, or whatever. They got their own thing going on. Actually, I did see something like that the other day where it's like a bunch of Bama fans were arguing about something with each other. But the point is that we say this all the time, that most of college football is waiting. It's waiting for the season to begin. It's waiting for the game to get here. And we just sort of make up stuff to do while we're waiting. And some of that leads to like fan-on-fan arguments. Now, a lot of that is like fun and good. In other words, if I said, here's how I think that Georgia ought to try to stop Jalen Milroe, and you said, no, I think they ought to try to do this. Like, that's an argument, but it's not like a serious argument, right? It's like, that's just a bunch of people kind of sharing some thoughts on a topic, right? And I may feel passionate about my point of view, or you may feel passionate about your point of view. But there's not a lot of like stakes to that. It seems like when it becomes about a person, all of a sudden now people get a lot more entrenched. And like the Stetson thing was that. I can promise you this. There were a lot of people in 2021 that when Georgia won the national championship, their initial thought was, now these are in some cases maybe people who'd been fans their entire life, but their initial thought was not, oh, wow, great, I'm alive to see this. It's, oh no, a bunch of people have saved receipts of things I've said in the past. And it just shouldn't be that way. It just shouldn't be that way. And a lot of people tried to make us miserable going into the 2022 season because they needed Stetson to flop as a way of saving face for what they had gotten wrong with the 2021 season. And some of these people are in the media too, by the way. But right now we're talking about fans. And I'm just telling you right now, it just shouldn't be that way. I mean, no one should take their own opinions that seriously because nobody is going to bat much higher than about 50% in terms of what we think is going to happen. It just doesn't go down that way. Did you know? This is why I like gambling, because gambling kind of gives some reality check on some of this kind of stuff. Did you know that when you kind of factor what they call like the vigorish, like the handle that the hold that a sports book kind of puts on a bet, on sort of a basic bet, which is like 110 on one side, 110 on the other. Like you have to get like 53% of your bets right in order to break even when you factor the extra price that the sports book takes on the bet. And almost nobody does that, right? I mean, a professional sports bettor is not getting 80% of his bets right. No one's going to do that. He's trying to get 56% of his bets right so he can show some profit over the course of the long haul. And most people can't even do that. So all of us shooting off the hip, me included, y'all, I view my job not to be right. I view my job to be clear. I want my opinion to be clear. And therefore, if I got it right, got it wrong. The way that I fail is not getting the opinion wrong. I can't do much better than 50-50 on any of these takes, nor can you. My job is to be clear. That way you know what it is that I do think. And if I get it right, if I get it wrong, then you can come back on here. But my job is not to get right 75 or 80% of the time. No one does that. The coaches don't even know with that level of certainty what's going to happen. That's just the way that it goes. So I realize I've gotten on a soapbox about this. But for the people who get so entrenched into their previous Stetson Bennett opinion or their previous Mike Bobo opinion, give it up. We don't think you're that smart to begin with. The idea that you can't admit that you're wrong, we're not impressed. We're just not. I don't want you to be impressed with me. I'm not that impressed with you. All of us are just trying to figure this out the best that we can. And over the course of time, we're all going to bat about 500. We're going to be about 50-50 in terms of what we think is going to happen compared to what actually happens. And that's what's fascinating. I mean, the whole world thought Alabama was going to totally destroy Auburn on Saturday, and they almost lost. Instead of being like, oh, gosh, I can't believe I got that wrong, how about we live in, like, wonder? And, like, I can't believe college football has such an ability to surprise us. Like, that's the right way to look at that. Anyway, let's see what else. Foster Moss says, oh, the Bobo opinions will be back, though, if Georgia loses on Saturday. That's probably true. How about B.A.'s Ty Stone Cold style calling for such an easy Georgia win that Brock Vandagriff gets into the game? That is really something. I believe my happiness would probably be uncontainable if that were to occur. Let's see what else. Some people mentioning some activity around Dobbins. I believe that might be for the Carter funeral. I believe that might be the case for Mrs. Carter's funeral. Frank Patterson says, speaking of receipts, do you remember early in the year when people were worried about RBU's running back room? Good point. They've clearly kind of come into their own right now. Frank, I believe you're right about that. DMart42 says all it takes is one bad game, and Carson's the worst quarterback, and Bobo doesn't have a clue. And obviously he says that jokingly. I understand where that's coming from. But we'll also acknowledge this, is that, the standard that's been set previously is big performances in big games. So there is a little bit of extra pressure on Carson to step up and play well in the big game. And, Todd Monken was throwing perfect games for the most part in the postseason a year ago. There's obviously a little bit of pressure on Coach Bobo to kind of replicate that. We won't pretend that's not the case. But the track record for success this year would lead you to believe that both guys are certainly capable of doing that. Bill Coons says Tyler Simmons was not offside. I like that. B.A.'s Ty Stone Cold Style says, is Robinson back? Probably not quite yet. William Perry says it's not about rooting against Stetson. I never did. It's about these people that think he deserves a statue. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a way to take that too far, I guess. But there was also a lot of negative stuff around Stetson at one point in time that was, completely unfair. And I'm pretty liberal about statues. I'd be sort of okay with anybody getting a statue, I guess. Georgia just needs, I think, a lot more statues. I'd say that the most deserving of statue from this era is probably Brock, but I've also never seen a statue that I didn't think had a right to exist. So I'm sort of okay with statues. Let's see what else. All right, let's take one more round of comments here. Rome Dog, also on the subject of McClellan, the Alabama running back. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty big deal. We've talked a lot about the Georgia injuries. We need to talk more about that. And Alabama, has been a little bit more limited with their running back depth this season. So that's a pretty important, that's a pretty important thing. Beach Dog says humility is only a BA reality check away. Yeah, I guess you're right about that. DT says the Joe Paterno statue did not have a right to exist. Yeah, I guess they took that one down. Andrew Sisson says if the Dogs score one more point than Bama, I'll be happy. I know what you mean by that. Randy Hall also mentioning the McClellan injury over here. Boy, a lot of comments today. Scott Harris calling out Heather Dinich for her takes. Thankfully, when Georgia plays well that it has been lately, the Dinich takes don't quite matter quite as much. Good point about that. Rome Dog says he wants to see how Beck handles the big stage. It's certainly a fascinating thing, and this is where Stetson was obviously at his best. Rome Dog also mentioning Cedric Von Prawn. Yeah, we're going to talk more about what Van Prawn said. It's worth going to the DawgNation YouTube page and watching this. Great story he told about, what Nick Chubb said to him after the Georgia victory in the 2021 National Championship game. And when you listen to a guy like Van Prawn, really Kamari Laster both, who talked yesterday, you just realize there are so many quality just guys playing this game on Saturday. And there's a part of me that wishes, imagine if we weren't so emotionally invested into this game, how much fun it'd just be to watch it play out. Strategizing, game within the game, chess match, good players, building on legacies, and all that kind of stuff. It'd just be a fun game to watch. Obviously, most of us watch it with a very different edge to us because it means a lot more to us than just two good football teams playing a great football game. But it would be fun to do from that standpoint. Okay, so the Fran Brown thing apparently is official. Fran Brown, is that right? Let's check here. Let's see if we got this. All right, let me try to confirm this. Not confirm. I'm not confirming it. I'm seeing if it's out there. Randy Hall says it's official. A lot of folks are saying it's expected to happen. Yeah, so it looks like this is about done. I don't quite see it being super official, but it looks like it may about be done here. Yeah, so it looks like Fran Brown. Randy says it's official. I don't see the official announcement yet, but it does look like it's about to happen here. Fran Brown, the new head coach at Syracuse. We'll see what that means for his availability for Georgia for the SEC championship. I'd certainly like to see him, continue to coach here, for that, and then maybe try to do the double duty type thing before. Yeah, so it looks like, so everybody seems to be saying expected to, which is kind of where we had this before. So it seems like that's about done there on that. So it is a fact of life. Those kinds of things happen. I don't know that many of us had him as the most likely guy to get hired away, but I think most of us had quite likely that Georgia would have someone hired away, and that's the way that kind of goes down. All right, let's squeeze in a couple more comments. We've got to get out of here.
Brandon, it seems like by the way you talked to him during the show, by the way you talked about him, Corey Raymond, you want to hire him today?
Oh, I don't know about that. He may have too much stench of Florida still on him right now. At one point in time, Raymond would have seemed like a big deal for anybody. But after you're part of that Florida debacle, he may have a little bit too much stench on him for now, which is funny. Paul Moon says, I mentioned that Jeff had the story up, the quote from Ellis Robinson's mom. We're still processing everything, and we're happy for Coach Fran. So there you go there on that. Hopefully that's all squared away and good. Let's see what else. TJ Smith says, regardless of who plays and who calls the plays, we should be appreciative of the glory days we are experiencing. Yeah, no team in SEC history has ever won more consecutive games than Georgia has. That is a remarkable, remarkable thing. What else? Jonathan Aaron on the idea of, Kirby following the footsteps of Nick Saban and Bill Belichick about everybody being day-to-day or week-to-week. Yeah, you're not giving anything on injuries right now. Let's see what else. All right, we got to go. It's late. Y'all, we'll be back tomorrow. Fun guests for us. Continue all week long. Really good stuff from David Pollack, if you missed that a little earlier. Strong takes in the SEC championship from him. And y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the prices promised. You can trust RS Andrews for all of that. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.